Man, I really don't get nervous much, but definitely sitting there, on day 2 and day 3, waiting for that phone to ring. I'm definitely going to have some nerves and, maybe a little bit of anxiety.
I've been overlooked my whole life. When I was a little kid, like, this ain't new to me. Like, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. Like, literally, I know, like, I've been overlooked a long time.
I've been dreaming of this for my whole life. Growing up, it's been get that school paid for, get that scholarship. But once I got to high school and I had that scholarship, my goal was, okay, we got to take this and run with it.
Welcome into our Pig Trail Nation draft special, where for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to take a deep dive into the Arkansas Razorbacks, who could hear their names called this week in the NFL draft. Right now, there are at least 5 Razorbacks who could be drafted, and we got a chance to see those guys at Arkansas's Pro Day back in March. Now, 16 Razorbacks did participate in Pro Day. Just not all of them projected to be drafted. The 5 who are in that zone right now: defensive lineman, you just saw him there, Landon Jackson and Gregory; wide receivers Andrew Armstrong and Isaac Teslaw; and running back Jaquindon Jackson. You might notice that guys like Tyrone Broden right there, Hudson Clark, Anton Junkaj, Danico Slaughter also participating in Pro Day. They just aren't projected to be picks in those mock drafts right now. Now let's bring in the rest of the team: Mike Irwin, Evan Kamiko, and Jacob Morris. And before we get started breaking down all those guys I just mentioned there, I want to get Jacob's thoughts on something really quickly, because you were at Arkansas's Pro Day. You got to go through, see all of what they were doing, but also talk to some of those guys as well about how they're feeling ahead of the draft. What did you notice?
Yeah, what was interesting is a lot of the guys, especially the ones that went through the NFL Draft Combine, they come into the Pro Day with the idea of, we know what we need to work on, we know what we've been told by scouts, and how do we address that? For Isaac Teslaw, we talked with him specifically. Creating separation was a big deal for him, and we'll talk about that coming up when we go over Isaac. But stuff like that for guys, you target that, you learn from the combine, and then with drills specifically, if you didn't run a 40 time that you liked, kind of like Andrew Armstrong at the combine, you get an opportunity to do that again at the Pro Day. But it's interesting picking these guys' brains, hearing what they're working on as they move towards the draft process and what they were hoping to get out of that Pro Day experience.
I like that you mentioned some guys had a better Pro Day, like Andrew Armstrong, because we're going to get into some of those stats here. And like I said before, we're going to break down at least the 5 Razorbacks that we feel kind of confident that they could hear their names called at the NFL draft later on this week. So look, let's jump on right into it. I know one of the people that everybody has been talking about when we're talking about the Arkansas Razorbacks and who could be drafted, that's going to be Landon Jackson. He's projected in most mock drafts as a top 50 pick. He could even be a late first rounder, guys. So let's take a look at how he did at the NFL Combine. His vertical jump ranking first among all the defensive ends at the Combine. His broad jump was second in that group. His relative athleticism score, that's your RAS, right at the bottom of your screen, 9.78, which was also second among all the defensive ends there. And his 3-cone drill time of 7.13 seconds, tying for third among that group as well. Last season at Arkansas, he finished the year with 6.5 sacks, 49 total tackles, 27 of them solo, and 9.5 for loss, and a forced fumble as well. So guys, when you look at a guy like Landon Jackson right now, his projections could be a late first rounder, could go that second day. What do you see from him? Let's start with Evan.
Yeah, I think with Landon, he's one of those cases where, like you said, he can go really high in the draft, but also he could fall to that 3rd, 4th round pick, where I think that's more realistic for him, maybe the 3rd, 4th round. Again, we'll get into all of that, but what really strikes me about Landon is he only really had 2 good games the last 2 years. This year it was Texas A&M, 8 total tackles, 3 tackle for loss, and 2 sacks. And last year it was that Alabama game. Every time you see Landon Jackson come up on a CBS show, ESPN, they're always using that Alabama game from back in 2023. And that's a little puzzling when you look at a guy like Landon Jackson. We kept saying over and over again during the season, when is this guy going to show up? And unfortunately, he showed up in bits and pieces this year, but wasn't as dominant as some of the other guys, and especially guys on defense who were creating havoc. 15th in the conference was Landon in sacks. So there's a lot of questions around Landon about consistency, and that's where you could see kind of 2nd round, 3rd round, maybe even 4th if he falls.
Yeah, Mike, that's something that you and I talked about when we were off the set, is that consistency. Maybe those scouts are looking at those numbers going, okay, what is he going to do for us? Do you kind of feel the same way?
Well, I will say this, because he was Arkansas's potentially big name pass rusher, he got double teamed a lot. And that probably affected him. And for whatever reason, in some games that didn't work. But he did have these massive games, and then he would just be very ordinary for 3, 4 games. So he's got to overcome that one way or another. I don't know how much that will affect him. I don't think he's a first-round guy, maybe late second round. I think they'll still look at that and have some questions. But the real issue is he's going to get drafted. He's going to sign a contract, but does he get to a second contract? I mean, that's the whole thing with somebody that goes as high as he will go, is what do you do once you're there? And do you get yourself into a second contract? Because that's where you make your money. And if we're talking Razorbacks and Razorback fans and how they look at this sort of thing, they always want to see a guy not just get drafted, because that happens a lot, but do they stick? Yeah. Because Arkansas does not have a history, especially lately, last 7, 8, 9 years, of putting somebody in the NFL and they stay there 8, 9 years and make a lot of money.
And have success in the league, too, because you look at a guy like Traylon Burks, who everybody was high on, a first-round pick, and just hasn't been able to produce in the league like Razorback fans would have hoped. Jacob, we talk about the pros and cons of a guy like Landon Jackson. Where do you see the upside of him, but where do you kind of see the negatives like we've been talking about?
Yeah, well, Mike and Evan both hit it there in terms of its consistency is what you're looking for, right? And I think, you even just bringing up Traylon Burks, right? It's an example of situation, right, and a fit where a guy goes and how that might ultimately help him. And I think both Evan and Mike hit the nail on the head in terms of when you look at Landon, you do have to factor in the fact that Arkansas didn't have another elite pass rusher on the line. So he was seeing so much attention from opposing offensive lines. And, I think of an example like, for example, Shamar Stewart was the only guy that had a better relative athletic score than Landon Jackson. Yeah. And he's getting a lot of looks by NFL teams because his stats pop in a way that Landon's maybe don't. But on the other side of the Texas A&M defensive line was another all-SEC pass rusher in Nick Scorton, right? And so that takes away a little bit of the attention that offensive lines were able to give Landon. And so you saw elite flashes of his talent, but it is providing some level of consistency and some ability to produce that time and time again. A lot of times people were worried about his quickness and his athleticism, but that's really where he shined at the draft combine, and that's why he was one of the biggest winners whenever you looked up and down the board, because some of the concerns about his athleticism were kind of mitigated by the fact that he tested really, really well at the combine. But again, as it is with all 5 of the guys we're going to talk about here, it's about fit and where these guys ultimately find themselves. That's going to play as big of a role as anything in them getting to a second contract potentially.
Yeah, what these teams need, right? Because that's what you're looking at when you look at all the NFL teams, and they're identifying, hey, we think a guy like him could absolutely thrive in the system that we have and what we need right now in this draft. And this draft is kind of a weird one. I mean, that's why we're kind of so, hey, he could be a late first rounder. He could be, like Evan said, maybe third round, fourth round. And it's just, there's so much unknowns about what all these teams need and what they have on the board. Jacob, I'll start with you and we'll go down the line there. Is there a team that you could see him thrive at?
So here's where it's kind of interesting, right, is the good thing for Landon is that what is one of the most important positions in the entire NFL and really in football in general is those edge players, right? So that's where you could see a guy like Landon vaulting up the board. If somebody falls in love with Landon and they say, we really need to get our edge guy and we think Landon is our guy, then sure. And you look down the list, I wrote down pretty much the entire NFL here. The Browns, the Titans, the Panthers, the Niners, the Colts, the Falcons. And again, pretty much everybody in the league is looking for a consistent threat on the edge. Those are some that pop right off the bat, but it depends, again, with teams that are picking high, like the Browns and the Titans. They're going to look other places. Would they come back around in the second and third, like Evan was talking about, and go for Landon there? Who knows? But regardless, everybody needs quality edge players. It just depends on where you ultimately look to find them.
Absolutely. Jacob, all great points there. Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this because you have a lot of feelings about where Arkansas Razorbacks go in the draft and what teams they fit, but you'd also like to see them end up at certain teams. And I know Razorback fans feel the same way about that, Mike.
Yeah, obviously, if you're a player, you want to go somewhere where they need you. I don't look at it that way because honestly, they're gone. They're not Razorbacks anymore. So I still look at them as what can they do for Arkansas? And the big problem, as long as I've covered this team, and that's 49 seasons, the big problem is this school does not have a history of putting players with teams that are popular with Arkansas fans. And there's really just 2, the Cowboys and the Chiefs. Yeah. I mean, that's not to say there are certain Razorback fans. I'm sure all NFL teams have a few fans that are Razorback. But if you talk about the majority of fans, And I look at Darren McFadden, who was probably the best college player of all time at Arkansas, because he's runner-up for the Heisman twice, should have won it once, got screwed. And he goes to Oakland. Ugh. I mean, that's nothing for Razorback fans. And then he goes to a team that basically just overuses him and beats him up and shortens his career. He does get to come back to the Cowboys late just to kind of, you know, get it some more money there on the tail end of the thing. But he was used up by then. Now, if Jerry Braindead Jones,
okay, all right, this is where the show is going.
Drafts this guy. I'm telling you, he was good enough as a running back in that situation to really make a difference. And Razorback fans would have coalesced around that. I look ahead to next year. Taylon Green, if he has a great year, would Dallas, you know, bring him in maybe with the idea in 2 or 3 years he's their starter? Would Kansas City do that? That would be big, but it never happens that way. It just doesn't. And so what we're left with, and I've gone around and talked to people about the draft, and they're like, you know, nobody's really excited. I mean, there may be a few fans. This is not, first of all, an NFL state. I mean, we don't have NFL teams in here. And most Razorback fans are Razorback and college football fans. Doesn't mean they don't care about the NFL, but when you don't land anybody at a team where you care anyway, and when so many cases they don't do anything anyway, I mean, Traylon Burks, that could have been a big deal. He just went to the wrong team, honestly.
Yeah.
And I hope it hasn't ruined him, but he's got to do something now, or that's it. And that's a waste.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the way I look at the draft right now. Is I think Razorback fans are going, whatever. You know, there doesn't seem to be a guy that goes to a team and gets everybody excited, and he ends up being one of the most talked about. Because that helps your recruiting when you got a guy that they're talking about every Sunday. Talking about the TV guys are talking about the guy.
Yeah.
Then that kind of gets you some fans, younger players or younger kids watching the games. And the draft, the NFL doesn't do much for Arkansas.
And you bring up a good point, because it's like it can help you with recruiting. It can excite a fan base, right? If you have a guy that they're talking about every single Sunday, that they're saying, you know where he played in college? Arkansas, right? And that's something that we can talk about a little bit deeper on the show. Evan, I'm going to round this conversation a little bit back to Landon Jackson and where we think he's going to end up.
Yeah.
You can't say the Bears on every single guy.
No,
okay?
I'm not going on every guy, but Landon I am.
Wow. Okay. All right.
I will
but
on
give us
Landon.
why. Give us why.
I think that, and again, it's the Bears are in a unique situation where they have 39, 41, and then 71. They've got 3 picks in that range where Landon can go. Chicago needs an edge rusher. They need someone to pair Montez Sweat with. They drafted Austin Booker last year in the 5th round, trading back in for him. He wasn't really what they were, but Landon gives you that size and the speed that the Bears do end up needing, and that's why I think he can be a very valuable asset to maybe learn under Montez Sweat and then be the guy to be a number 2. Landon Jackson probably won't be a number 1 edge rusher on a team in the NFL. I think that's just the reality of the league right now. Again, Jacob brought up a lot of the teams that need him because they need depth, and I think the Bears really fill in that void, and they have enough picks in that range where we think Landon can go to be able to say, all right, we're going to go out and draft Landon Jackson. So I do like Landon to the Bears, maybe in that 41 slot or 71, but again, when Jacob lists half the NFL, there's not much else place you can go after that. So, but all good points though.
Jacob lists a lot of teams.
He did.
There's a reason why Landon has a lot of top 30 visits as well, and that's that reason. They all want a guy like him. And so, Jacob, you're bringing up a great point, but we're going to talk a little bit further about some of the needs when we switch over to the offensive side of the ball. 2 wide receivers that we've talked a lot about this season. We're going to talk about them right now. And so let's switch on over to Isaac TeSlaa, who really turned heads with his performance at the Combine. I'm going to show you why, bringing up those stats one more time here. A 39.5-inch vertical jump, ranking 5th among the wide receivers there. His 20-yard shuttle drill time, ranking 1st among that group, though. But what really stood out for Isaac, and that's going to be what I mentioned before, that RAS on the bottom of your screen, that's relative athleticism score. It's hard to say. Next Gen Stats has his RAS as a 996, which ranked 1st among all receivers at the Combine and ranked 16th among 3,408 wide receivers going back to 1987. Pretty impressive right there. So, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you once again. We've talked to Isaac, we've gotten a chance to talk to Landon, we've talked to Andrew as well. And Isaac's a guy that not only are you getting so much potential through him, or out of him if you take him as a pick, but he's like a guy that's just going to work for you. He's going to do whatever he needs to do to make that team successful. Evan, what do you see out of Isaac?
Yeah, it just echoes what Sam Pittman has said about him. He's the epitome of what Sam Pittman wants an Arkansas Razorback to be. But I think with Isaac, what we saw is, again, and everyone's going to say it because we all have similar scouting on Isaac, but, you know, it's kind of the same consistency issues with Landon, where Isaac was really the third or fourth wide receiver that Taylon Green would look to, so he wouldn't get the volume of passes that Andrew Armstrong or Isaiah Satania would get. But Isaac, again, when you throw the ball to him, he's going to probably make the catch. The issue is the separation. Wasn't getting great separation. He had 11 games with 3 or less catches in 2024. That just stands out as, look, in some of those games, he made a lot with his catches. You go to that 75-yard touchdown on a broken third down play in the first drive against Texas A&M, and he did great there. But again, you look at the consistency. The bowl game was really good for him, but again, only 3 catches. So he's not a guy that's going to really light it up when it comes to receptions per game, but he's somebody that can break the game and can make the difference. And again, you go back to, you talk about RAS, he was a 2023, freak watch list. So it just shows you his athleticism, what he can be, but there's a lot of that in the NFL, and that's the problem.
A lot of potential, just don't know how they're going to pan out. I think that's we're going to talk about that with the other guys as well on this list. Mike, you've talked to, we talked about Isaac throughout the season, and you kind of even were a guy that was like, he's not being utilized enough by the offense. And so do you still kind of feel like they're looking at those stats and they're not seeing the full potential of a guy like him?
I think the quarterback didn't target him much. I mean, let's get real. Until Satania left at the end of the year, we saw Tesla come across in the Missouri game playing really well, the bowl game, and then of course in the Senior Bowl. So he's on a roll, and I think we're just now starting to see what he could have done all along. I don't know about this lack of separation thing. I do know there's a difference between foot speed, what they call foot speed, which is your ability to separate very quickly, and straight line speed. So we know he's got the straight line speed. He's faster than Armstrong. But, can he stop on a dime, cut, and then cut back in another direction and separate himself? And he's going to have to prove that he can do that. Now, some of that, you get in those shuttle drills and stuff like that. But he's, when he works out, I think people will look at him. I think he's going to go. He'll get drafted. I'm not sure how high, but because he's just intense and because he works so hard, and coaches like that, I think he's a guy that will stick.
Yeah, that's one of the things he was telling me in our interview that we did, which you can go watch on our website right now as we speak. That was one of the things he said when I said, what is kind of your sales pitch to these teams? And he's like, honestly, it's very similar to Andrew's, where it's not just what you see on tape. It's not just how I'm testing at the combine. It's what I can offer you off the field as well. I'm a hard worker. I'm driven. And that's what he did at Arkansas. He honestly didn't complain. He wasn't a guy that was complaining about Taylon Green not targeting him enough. Sam Pittman knew that. He was going to do whatever he needed, and that's showing now. Jacob, Mike brings up a good point about, look, he's a guy that still has things to prove, but we just showed you the numbers there. He's proven a lot already.
Yeah, he's proven a lot athletically. He's been open about the fact, which I think is another great thing about Isaac, is he's been open about the fact that it's awesome that I proved what I did at the NFL Draft Combine. The next thing that scouts and everybody else wants to see is production on the field. So he said it's one thing to do that in terms of drills and everything else, but you got to produce on the field as well. And the thing that everybody's going to go to in terms of a con on Isaac TeSlaa is, besides, the lack of consistency in production, is kind of just this separation moniker. You kept hear it kind of get thrown out over and over again. And so the flip side to Isaac is he's so good at catching balls in competitive situations, right? In terms of, we saw him high point and go up and catch in traffic. And the immediate con that people go to is, well, if you're consistently in traffic time and time again, it means that maybe you're not separating at a high level. But we've seen what he can do athletically, right? It's just about, the natural concern is going to be, if you couldn't do that at the SEC level, Are you going to be able to do that at the NFL level? But to go back to a little bit of what you talked about, Courtney, and what we've all kind of hit on here with Isaac is I think you're getting so much more than just the player when you draft Isaac. And what stood out at Pro Day about that was the way Andrew Armstrong, who transferred in the same class as Isaac and has seen him work the way he has, the way Andrew lit up when he talked about Isaac and the performance that he did, because he said, we've been seeing this for 2 years in practice. We know what he's capable of. We know the type of worker he is. And it was great to see him at the NFL Draft Combine, same way as Landon, be a guy who was a winner and get recognized on a national stage, because guys like Andrew Armstrong, they've seen him doing it behind the scenes for a while now.
Absolutely, and that's something I've asked them both, how they feel about each other. And we're going to get to Andrew in just a second, but Isaac also lit up talking about Andrew.
Yeah.
They roomed together at the NFL Draft Combine, and I said, what did that do for you guys? It was just great. It helped us both. We just felt so comfortable to be there. We were happy to be with each other. And that's just something, you see that team camaraderie that they had together. They propelled each other every single day. They pushed each other in that room. And it's paying off right now. We're going to talk about Andrew because Isaac said he's a sleeper pick of this draft. And if you're not paying attention to him, you probably should. We paid attention to him because of his numbers that he put up in the SEC last year, leading the conference in receiving with 1,140 yards. But one of the cons that I think some people are looking at here, 1 touchdown. Compared to the year before that, I believe he had 5. So just a little bit of difference there. He had a 37.5-inch vertical jump at the combine. He ran a 4.5 140-yard dash, but as me and him talked about in our interview, he ran better at Arkansas's Pro Day. And I know they clocked him, I think it was Jacob, a 4.5. He told me, he said, look, I had the scouts showing me a 4.37 on their clock. So he was really excited about that. When we sat down a few weeks ago, he said he thinks he's a sleeper pick. Isaac Teslaw thinks he's a sleeper pick. Landon Jackson thinks he's a sleeper pick. I'm sure Jaquindon Jackson does as well. You could go down the list of people who think that this guy is going unrecognized in this draft. But there's could be some reasons for that. Jacob, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, in terms of, he's a little bit of the opposite of what we're talking about with Isaac here, in that he didn't flash in any specific area athletically, right? And what you have with Andrew Armstrong and Isaac Teslaw, which is what I think is really interesting about these guys, is you kind of have a differing of perspective in how you approach prospects in the NFL draft. Because there are a lot of people, rightfully so, who say, man, I think we overthink the combine stuff a lot. Because you look at Andrew Armstrong, and he was arguably the best wide receiver in the best league in college football last year, right? So it's a kind of a debate on whether you want to go with production or potential, right? Athleticism versus what somebody's actually done on the field. And so with Andrew, you know, he didn't flash quickness the way that maybe a lot of people thought he would at the combine, but he has maintained he can run faster. And most of all, he has produced at the highest level of college football. And it obviously counts for something, but I think it should maybe be counting for a little bit more than people are giving him credit for. I loved in the sit down that you did with him, he said, I've been slept on my entire life. This is nothing new to me. And I love that mentality from him because he embraces this, and so do all his teammates. They know he's flying under the radar, and that's what he's been doing ever since he was at Texas A&M Commerce, and before that as well.
That's the underdog mentality he has. That's why he works so hard. He said, you know, I just eat, sleep, breathe football. I'm going in. He was telling me after they beat Tennessee, he didn't even celebrate. He was like, who we got next? Let me go look at tape. And that's what you're getting from a guy like Andrew Armstrong, not just like we talk about a great guy on the field, but a really hard worker off the field. You know, I love that you mentioned that. I like that you mentioned his speed as well. He said, you know, hey, I get it. I go, I can't run a 4.5. He goes, it's a little slow. I get it. I understand you have guys running 4.2s, 4.3s, and so I get it's a little slow. But he feels that he's a guy, when I asked him who he feels like he is in the NFL, Devontae Adams was who he said. He said, because he's not the fastest guy out there, but he makes plays, and that's what I'm going to do with any NFL team. Do you agree with that, Mike Irwin? You think this is a guy that can make plays in the NFL?
I think every once in a while a guy comes along where these pro scouts and team owners and people, and GMs and whatever, and they're just stupid. They're just stupid. This guy was first team All SEC, led the SEC. This isn't some ding-dong conference. Led the SEC in receiving and total catches, and you're calling him a sleeper? Well, you're sleeping. You're the one that's sleeping, not him. I think I don't know how high he's going to go, but wherever he goes, I think he's going to succeed. We talked about getting to the second contract. I think he will, because he works like Tesla, and he's productive. And I don't care. You look at these numbers or whatever. I look at what he did. Again, he's not on a really good team. First of all, the offensive line wasn't very good last year. Got a quarterback that's kind of hit and miss, and he leads the SEC in receptions and total catches, total yards and receptions, and you're calling him a sleeper pick? They're stupid.
I love it. Mike Irwin calling out the scouts there. Evan, we talked about, again, you can't say the Bears.
No, I'm not going to say the Bears.
Good.
I'm not going to say the Bears. We could use him, but I'm not going to say the Bears.
Okay, all right. Who are you going to say? Where does he fit? Where does a guy like Andrew Armstrong? I know that there's multiple teams that need a receiver like him. Where could he be best used?
Yeah, you look at someone like the Southeastern connections, and you look at the Chiefs, I think, are one of them, and I think the Saints as well. Those are two teams that really could use a guy who is reliable. You look at the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. They've had some inconsistencies when it comes to wide receivers staying on the field over the last couple of years because off-the-field issues as well as injuries, and Travis Kelce getting up there in age. So I think Andrew could be a fifth-round pick. I think the Rams are another team. They love late-round wide receivers. Andrew could end up going there as well. And the Saints, kind of that similar thing. Who knows who their quarterback's going to be? Could it be a Jackson Dart getting drafted at 9? Who knows? But that's another team that either of those wide receivers, Tesla or Andrew Armstrong, can go to. But with Andrew Armstrong as well, off of Mike's point really quickly, is that he's a guy that, like we've said, he's going to work, he's going to put his head down. Remember, he missed games this season. Like, he did not play against UAPB, which he probably would have had a monster game, maybe 100-plus yards. He had 5 100-yard games in 2024. And not to mention as well, that Auburn game, he gets hurt in that game early on, takes a shot, and was kind of iffy the rest of the game. I don't remember off the top of my head if he ended up returning in that game, but only had 5 or so receptions. He did return in that game. But still not 100% like we've seen him. So again, you take away that first game, and then again, Oklahoma State, his best game, 164 yards, 10 receptions. That was his first game of the season. Like that, and again, not a great defense Oklahoma State ended up being, or not really a great team in general, but still, the potential is there with Andrew Armstrong, and he can make any of these teams in the 6th or 7th round very happy.
I look at what Mike says. I said this to him, Mike. I went, sleeper pick? Are they looking at what you did? Did they watch the tape? And he loved that a lot. So you can go watch that full interview over on our website right now. One of the other teams I've read for him, the Falcons, they could use him. You talk about that Southeast connection. So it could be interesting to see where both him and Tesla go. I really feel good about those guys and their chances to get drafted. I know projections go all over the place with these guys. We won't really know where they're going to end up, but I really feel good about the chances of those guys. One guy that I'm not so sure will get drafted, but we're going to mention him because there was a lot of talk about him going into this season, throughout the year, and even in February going into the NFL Combine, Jaquindon Jackson, because he racked up 790 yards on 149 carries this past season with 15 touchdowns. Now, he isn't projected to be drafted right now, but NFL.com says he could be a priority free agent, which I do believe that will be true. It's because he's injury prone. We're going to get into that. And the fumbles, Mike, we remember this. With the fumbles of this guy this past season, he didn't run the 40-yard dash of the Combine. He did run it at Pro Day, clocking a 4.75. He also benched 15 reps at Pro Day as well, which would have tied for 8th at the Combine out of the running backs. He didn't test incredibly well, which is another reason why he's probably not projected to be drafted right now. When you look at a guy like Jaquindon Jackson and what he was able to do at Arkansas, you look at that production, you go, oh, look, he's good. However, we know what was he dealing with all season long. And Jacob, you can talk about this. The cramping. He would leave and just cramping up. And oh my gosh, Jaquindon Jackson's not in the game right now because he's dealing with injuries. That's got to be something that these scouts are looking at and why he's fallen out of those projections.
Yeah, injury concerns are definitely a big deal when it comes to Jaquindon Jackson. And I think it's something we'll touch on a lot here is also with the running back position, where it's at in terms of the value of it and where you're going to spend draft picks teams are looking for guys that are versatile across the board, that can play on 3 downs, and that's something that we didn't see fully with Jaquindon, and he talked about that. He said some of the feedback he got from scouts was they wanted him to drop a little bit of weight, and they wanted him to be a little bit more versatile in terms of being a potential 3rd down back. And so as a result, at Pro Day, he did a bit of work with the receivers. He caught passes out of the backfield and all of that, but the injuries are a concern. I was going to go the fumble direction. I think that's definitely something people are a little bit concerned about as well. And, you know, it feels that 4.75 as well. He didn't run at the combine, and I think he was hoping for a little bit better than that because it just is what it is. That is very, very far from high-end speed for a running back.
Yeah.
And he's a bigger guy. His frame is important in terms of running through tackles, but I think he would have liked to see that number a little bit lower. There are flashes with Jaquindon Jackson, 15 touchdowns. We saw what he was capable of. But when you talk about drafting a running back, a lot of times teams are just looking for complete backs across the board, and there just are holes right now with Jaquindon Jackson.
And longevity, right?
Yeah.
You want longevity out of your running backs in the league, and that's brings into the conversation injury prone. Like if you're going to take a chance on a guy like that, it's like, no, you want longevity. You want a guy that can come in and help you right now and produce right now. And if you're leaving every so often in the game because you're cramping up, not that great. Evan, you feel the same way about that?
Yeah, I think one thing that we didn't touch on yet about Jaquindon, and it's going to be the same for the next player, Gregory, as well, is their age, right? Jacob brought up an amazing point about running back longevity in the league. Usually for a back, you've got 2 to 4 years. If you're lucky, 4+ if you're, get that second contract. But most backs, because of the NFL right now, are cycling out so quickly. You really only see a back stick on a team for 3 years.
Yeah.
For Jaquindon, who's a guy who played 4 seasons at Utah, played another season at Arkansas, he's up there in age. So that, I think, is a big question mark for him is if you're already 22, 23, 24, how are you going to look against a guy like maybe an Ashton Jeanty, who is the top back in this draft, who is a lot younger and who can go and give you, years till he's maybe 27, 28. That's 6 years right there. So I think that's something that when you look at this landscape of the running back, there's definitely a resurgence right now, thanks to Saquon Barkley, who's signing massive contracts and leading that charge for running backs to get paid finally. But Jaquindon's a guy, what Jacob mentioned, all of his things are absolutely factual and true, and I love all of them. But age is another one you have to add.
I don't love the fumbles. I didn't love that last year.
Nobody loves fumbles,
You can't
but what
make
are you
me
going
love
to do?
that. What are you going to do?
Hold on to the ball.
Ball security. Mike, I'm going to ask you this. Jaquindon Jackson, do you see him getting drafted? I mean, with all the things. Oh, okay, there we go.
He won't get drafted, and then here's the problem he's got. When you're not drafted, you got a very narrow window when you start working out with whatever team you end up with, because sign a free agency contract. You got to do something to make them notice you, because they're not going to be looking at you. They're looking at other people. I had a brother-in-law many, many years ago that had a great career in the Southwest Conference, but he got drafted. He went to San Diego, and I called him up during that period and asked him, and he said, well, they're just not looking at me. I said, they're not going to look at you. You got to make them look at you. And of course, he didn't make it. That's what you have to do. You've got to figure out some way, and you can't get hurt. He gets hurt, he's dead in the water. You've got to work your tail off, and you've got to do something to they're not going to put you in a position to be noticed. You've got to force them to look at you, which means you have to do some things that they didn't expect you to do. And then they'll look around and go, oh, all right, maybe we should give this guy a second look. But if you do what you've done at the college level, which is just kind of, I'm good here, now I'm not, I'm hurt. Well, I fumbled, but I'm really not that bad. No, you'll be gone. You'll be cut. You'll be one of the first guys cut.
Absolutely. So, I mean, he's got, when we talk about a lot to prove, this is a guy who's got a lot to prove. Jacob, you have something to add to that real quick?
It might seem like a small thing. The only thing, not the only thing, that he's got lots going for him. Something we haven't mentioned that he does have going for him was, he came into college football as a quarterback. And there are a lot of front offices that do place value, right, on not only being able to play multiple positions. And no, Jaquindon Jackson's not going to play quarterback in the NFL.
I don't think so.
But a general understanding, right, of how offenses work. And he talked about that being able to pick up blitzers and how that helped him in terms of being a better running back in pass protection. That's something we haven't mentioned that could be an asset for Jaquindon Jackson.
It was something that the NFL draft analysts have talked about, that is a bonus for him. Is it enough of a bonus to go over the things that we just said? And that's where I'm going. To me, the cons are a little more there. But, you know, hey, again, he could prove himself as being an undrafted free agent. He could absolutely, they're saying he's a priority free agent target, and that's where he will be. So look, we'll see what happens come later this week. The last guy we're going to talk about, and then we're going to bring in a special guest on the show. I'm very excited about it. But defensive lineman Eric Gregory, you just mentioned, Evan, I'm sure that's a really good point about age. This is a guy who's played a lot of college football, but he's a guy who could sneak in as like a 7th round pick. He has shown up in some mock drafts really, really late. So we'll see what happens there. Let's look a little bit at his stats here. And we talk about guys who improved from the combine to pro day. He is a perfect example of this. I'm going to tell you why in just a second. Because at pro day, his time of 4.64 seconds in the 20-yard shuttle drill would have ranked 4th among the defensive tackles at the combine. So he actually improved on his combine performance where he had a time of 4.95 in that drill. He also had 28 reps on the bench press at the combine, which ranked 3rd among the defensive tackles there too. So this is a guy that, again, could be a late pick there, but also could have a lot of upside as a priority free agent. Evan, what do you think about Eric Gregory?
Yeah, you'd like to see, again, 6 seasons. Age is a big factor in this. I go back to, you want a guy like that who's showing these numbers, and he has flash. Best game against Tennessee, 4 tackles, 2 solo, 1.5 sacks, but you want someone like that to be a developmental piece for your team, to bring them in and to really, say, all right, we'll put you on the bench for a year, rotate you, and see what goes on. But a guy who's got age, and age could work to his advantage. Like, that's something we didn't even bring up with Jaquindon, where you've played so much football, you understand defenses a little better, and for Eric, understanding offensive line and concepts and how to, create space and wreak havoc. But with him, you'd want that to be more of a developmental piece, but when you're 23, 24 years old, again, you'd rather go for that 20, 21-year-old who can give you that and be at 23, 24 like Eric is when, he's at the top of his game and understands the defense. So, I like to say more undrafted for Eric Gregory, but he does have upside and he can absolutely make a team if he puts his head down.
He's a guy that can get through and drop a running back for a 1-yard loss. I mean, he had 5 thrown for loss plays last year. He's quick, and I think there's potential there. Here's what I think will happen to him. He may go late in the draft, but even if he's a free agent, he's a guy they'll work with. We've mentioned that. He's a guy they'll go, okay, he's got potential here. Let's work with this guy for a year and then see what we can do the second year or whatever. And then he might get into a game, depending on injuries or whatever. Again, it's what you do once you get there. And I feel much better about his chances of making people notice him because he's a hard worker. He's got a lot of character and he's got some quickness, and he did enough at the college level. And it's a different position than defensive end. You're not going in there with quickness and trying to sack a quarterback. Most of the time it's, can you drop a guy at the line of scrimmage or drop a guy for a 1-yard gain or a 2-yard gain instead of 5 or 6 yards. And I think he's good at that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that he was good at here at Arkansas. And then, Jacob, to kind of ask you, there's a lot of teams that need defensive players, to go back to your point about Landon Jackson. So that's where he could sneak in there as maybe a 7th round pick.
Absolutely. It's kind of the opposite of the Jaquindon Jackson situation, right? In terms of there are so many running backs available and there are so many different areas you can go. Defensive linemen and interior defensive linemen like Eric Gregory are valuable in that regard, in terms of, like Evan said, you're more willing to give a guy like that some time and give him an opportunity to prove himself within your system. And so I think that's the hope for Eric Gregory, whether it's a 6th, 7th round pick or an undrafted free agent. We see guys like that all the time. Defensive linemen stick around for a while. We talk about making a second contract. Those are the guys where it's borderline not even surprising sometimes. You're just like, oh, all right, there's another one, right? Diamond in the rough, right? Eric Gregory's a phenomenal example of a guy like that that could potentially find his way into a system like that. And Evan makes an interesting point, too, where he's one where he's played 6 seasons of college football. He's played every season, too. It's not just like he has played in some games, right? And that's something where I think you would hope for him, and it's impossible to forecast, that would be an asset for him, that would give him a leg up on maybe somebody else that would be an undrafted free agent. Say, this guy knows football. Good guy to have in the locker room. Give him a chance and see what happens.
Yeah, and we talk about, again, a guy that off the field is a hard worker. You know, I don't believe you got to talk to him at Pro Day, did you? But he whenever we've gotten to sit down with him in any press conference, he's knowledgeable, he's kind, he's willing to do whatever he needs to do to help the team win. And I think that's just a valuable thing when scouts are looking at who they want to draft. It's just like recruiting, right? Yeah. It's not just about what these guys can do on the field. It's like, okay, your stats are good enough to get you on this team, but I like who you are as a person, and I think you're going to fit there as well with our team. It's something that Andrew's been told many a times, that they like how he talks to them. They like his work ethic. They like who he is as a person, and that'll help you go far as well in this too. We're going to talk to someone now. And actually, Evan's going to talk to someone now, to be totally fair there, who knows exactly what it's like to get drafted, to go through this process, and to be an Arkansas Razorback and to have done it. And that's DJ Williams. Evan Kamiko sat down with him to get his thoughts on all those guys and where he sees them going in the league. That's coming up right now.
Well, who better to bring in right now in our 2025 NFL Draft Preview Show than a guy who's been through the process, someone who's been in the league and a valued member of the Pig Trail Nation team. That's DJ Williams joining the show. I'm Evan Kamiko. DJ, we bring you in. You're someone, like I've already mentioned, who's got experience, knows what they're doing, knows a thing or two about the NFL and this entire process. We got 5 Razorbacks to talk about who are also going through this process right now and looking to get drafted. Let's start with your thoughts on the highest drafted prospect, and that's Landon Jackson. What do you got on him?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been very open about how I feel about Landon Jackson, and I know he has had statements before. He was at an event down here in Little Rock that I attended. This was at the beginning of the season, this past season, and we had a few people that we work with kind of ask him, what were you hearing as far as, coming back or going to the draft? And he says, I had scouts at that time tell me, I graded out as first round. And I admit, I was just like, it's kind of if you're a first round defensive lineman and you are graded out and that is legit, then you don't come back, you go. And so, but I do think he is talented. I don't believe he's a first round draft pick. I do believe he will be the first Razorback taken. But where he falls, I will say, depending on what a team needs, what other talent is left on the board, I would say he is a solid 3rd round pick. However, his combine, I think, showed his potential of he has so much more room to put on more weight. He's extremely athletic. The numbers show for it. So I think he is one of the very few people who rarely go to a combine and increase their stock, especially for a guy that's for sure going to get drafted. For the most part, the combine is just all show. The scouts, they look at tape. They want to see what the tape looks like. And I think when you look at the tape, a lot of people think pass rusher. He gets to the quarterback. I think outside of the Alabama game, a year ago, where he had 3 sacks and then kind of, only had 3 for the rest of the season, kind of the similar situation here. I don't think he is necessarily going to be off the board pick for a pass rusher. What I think is underutilized for Landon Jackson is his ability to be very effective in the run game. He's super long, he gets full extension, and he has the ability not only to prevent those linemen to getting up to the second level, to the linebackers, so he keeps those guys running free. He has the ability to shed, get off the block, and then be accounted for in the tackle. So I think he is very good at that, and I think that sometimes doesn't get enough attention. And so for that, I think in a perfect situation with his build, his size, his talents, a 3-4 type defensive end where you would have him as a end on the 3-4 nose, 2 ends, I think that's more of his spot. Then you have these outside guys and like outside linebackers who are more your dynamic pass rushers with a little bit more speed and quick twitch. So I think that's potentially what he may be looking at, even though I know we talked to him at Pro Day and he says he feels really good about it. And I think he believes he's going first round, but I think he is a solid 3rd round, but could slip into the 2nd round simply based off how freakishly athletic he is. And the thing about Landon, he grows every single year, not only in his talent, but in his size and frame, he has the ability to put on 25 more pounds easy and still be extremely explosive.
Yeah, he's been projected, if you read any mock drafts, around that 40 to 70 range. So right about where you're talking about, it would be really fun to watch if Landon could potentially even jump up higher than that. To your point, don't think he will either, but we'll move on and talk about some of these guys who you're going to see probably on day 3. And we'll start with the biggest catch of them all, Andrew Armstrong. I didn't mean to do that, but we'll go with it. I like that right there.
Yeah.
Andrew Armstrong, again, one of the top wide receivers in the SEC this year. What do you got on him going on day 3?
I think he's one of the more underrated players going into the draft. I mean, when you have a 1,000-yard season in the SEC, you had a quarterback in Talon Green who first season in this Coach Petrino offense, he picked his favorite target, and they paid attention to Andrew Armstrong. But how many times when that ball is up in the air, he has the ability to do something that you really can't coach. It's what comes natural to players, to track the ball in the air, have awareness of where the defender is, have awareness of his body, and he always came down with the catch. And those are things you can't practice. Those are things that you can't really try to coach up. Those just come natural. And he is one of the best people that I've seen be able to do that. He kind of reminds me of the way Kobe Hamilton used to be able to track the ball in the air. Former Arkansas receiver, got drafted to the Cincinnati Bengals coming out of college. But I think he is exceptional. I know when it comes to explosive, receiver, big dynamic player, the attributes don't necessarily jump off the charts. But running a 4.5, that is plenty, especially for a guy who understands concepts and spacing. I think he is very good at that, of creating space and being patient with his routes. And so then sure-handed. And so when it comes to a guy like that, even though I think he is awesome and I've praised him all season long, once again, depending on the team needs and what else is left on the board, I think could be a solid 4th round, 5th round guy, but unfortunately could easily slip to like a 6th round. If that's the case, then it would be a steal for whatever team could get him that late.
Yeah, someone that kind of, you almost think of like a Puka Nacua when you're almost talking about it, in that sense, where Puka did fall a lot lower than a lot of people did. He snuck in, the Rams took him, and he's someone who's excelled at the NFL level. Doesn't have that big speed that Andrew Armstrong has, but again, you kind of like that, where a team could trade up, maybe get him in that late round, and he can be a steal and a really reliable guy who wouldn't burn you over the top, but he'll get open and he'll be able to track the ball really well and make those catches.
Yeah, Evan, you brought up the perfect comp, because I remember watching Puka Nacua when Arkansas went down to Provo and played BYU, and it just seemed no matter where they threw it, he found a way to always come down with it, even when covered. Just great body awareness, and he understands concepts in the game, and so that was a really good comp.
Thank you. I'm glad that one actually worked out. So let's move on. Let's talk about wide receivers. We'll talk about one other one. It's Isaac Tesla, the guy out of Michigan who Sam Pittman has said he's the epitome of what an Arkansas Razorback should be. Curious what you got on him.
Another guy where you don't see too often that you get guys that just get drafted based off of athletic ability, but the numbers he put up, you got to be like, whoa now. He is another interesting guy for me because physically, he's everything you want in a receiver, especially when 4.40, I believe. Yeah, that's definitely going to open eyes. And then you go look at the tape, and he has an interesting one because he too, a product of Talon Green, kind of focusing on run receiver. If you go back and watch this year in Petrino's offense, very good with the spacing, great route running, and he seemed to be open a lot. Unfortunately, the ball didn't come his way. I can pick out one play in particular that Arkansas played against Texas A&M. It was a 3rd down, and Tesla came in motion, indicating that it's man-to-man, had a great rub concept with Isaiah Satania on the left side of the line of scrimmage, or left side of the offensive side of things, and had a great route, wide open. Taylor looked at him, held on to that ball, didn't get it out. And I know that's frustrating as a receiver when plays are drawn up to you. So when you look at the numbers and the stats, they don't jump off the charts. But if you watch the tape, you have a guy who is, one, extremely athletic, very explosive, understands concept spacing. And if you saw in that first game of the year over the middle, a catch from Malachi Singleton, a one-handed snag when they ran that seam route that I think he fell just before a touchdown, but it was one heck of a catch. And so he has that ability to make those big-time catches and the athleticism to go with it. The only thing that worries me about Isaac Tesla is when he is the number one guy. If you go back 2 years out of camp, he got, SEC freak watch lists. They were talking about it on SEC Nation, all the workout videos. And camp, all you heard was Isaac Tesla. The first couple games was balling out. He was the number one target. We got into SEC play, and they put athletes on him to focus on him as a number one receiver, and he struggled creating space. So that's one thing he's going to have to work on. One thing he's going to be challenged when he gets to camp. But he's another guy. This is where it gets weird. His combine was so good. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have said this before the combine, but he could potentially get drafted before Andrew Armstrong, which, in my opinion, is interesting. But that's been some talks. I've heard some scouts have kind of talked about that, and that's what they think about him. Once again, I think a knock on how underrated Andrew Armstrong is, and a really good nod to showing that this guy does have some hidden potential. But once again, I would say, depending on needs, a 5th, 6th, or 7th round guy. I'd be shocked if Isaac Tesla didn't get drafted. I wouldn't have said that before the combine.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on. Let's stay on the offense. Last guy I want to talk about on that side of the ball, it's got to be Jaquindon Jackson. We've seen him pretty much bulldoze his way through the SEC over the last year. Where do you have him potentially, again, being one of those late draft picks?
Fascinating with this guy because the tape is there. Yeah. The tape is there. And this is where it gets interesting when they talk about the psychological things of what these scouts are looking for. What's his favorite color? They do all those tests. If you could be a cat or a dog, what would it be? They do some weird stuff. All right. Yeah. They try to really get into the mind of these players. So you got, early in the year when he's healthy, great back, saw the hole, would make something out of nothing, hit the hole hard. And was very hard to take down and just seemed like a natural football player and a legit SEC running back. Dealt with some injuries, kind of slowed him up a little bit. But when you go back and look at the mental aspect of things, his testing, I was like, what have you been doing the past couple months? It was awful. It was awful. Not too many times that you see players really help themselves in a combine because it's all about the tape. Rarely do you see guys that hurt themselves in the combine. And I think he probably put himself in that category. Then you come back to pro day, really nothing much there. So you get into how does this guy carry himself like a professional? That's what I'm curious about. Because if you go back to the Oklahoma State game, we pointed out there's one play Talon had to scramble, and it was a situation where we needed to convert. Well, they drew up a perfect play where they were drawing up a screen, and it was perfect. They had pressure, all the defensive linemen going back. Talon's holding it. Then he's looking to dump it off to Jaquindon Jackson, who the play is designed for, and he's backside blocking somebody, And so it's just like, how do you mess that up when you are the primary target and this play is drawn up for you? How do you miss that? So a couple mental things when it comes to Jaquindon Jackson that would worry me, and it didn't seem like he was taking it serious when it comes to his training. I think he says, hey, I'm a football player. I'm just going to get out there and ball. For some guys, that does work. But when you're on a team that's kind of not too flashy when it comes to, okay, we really need to pay attention to this team because they got a lot of wins, is it because of this guy? Well, Arkansas doesn't have that. We haven't had that for a few years now. And so he is one guy that I think slips very late rounds. I would assume a 7th round draft pick, once again, depending on needs. You hate when you have injuries for guys, and he's a lot older. Shelf life for a running back is not very long. But he's going to have a lot of work to do, and he's going to have to approach it more like a professional.
Yeah, and potentially even practice squad and try to get off the practice squad and make a team. Let's talk and wrap up right now. Eric Gregory, the last guy we're going to dive into.
He's got to get to camp. He will get to camp simply based off his size and strength. But it's going to be an uphill battle for him. The thing about him is his character. You talked about practice squad. And this is where situations where people think that's, practice squad. You know how hard it is to just even get on a practice squad? I mean, look at the career of Dan Skipper. You know what I mean? And look where he is now. And so he's the one who has, I think, the character to go up and fight that fight. But it's going to be an uphill battle. He has good tape. He's a solid interior defensive lineman. But when you think of D linemen at that level that get drafted, they're wrecking balls. They're mayhem, and they're issues on that defensive side of the ball where the offensive coordinator's like, okay, how are we going to help people block this guy? I don't think that was much of a concern for a lot of offenses preparing for Arkansas's defense.
So those are the 5 names that are potentially going to get drafted
for the Razorbacks. DJ, before we go, as somebody, like I've already mentioned, who's been through the process, what would your advice to these guys be as they approach what could be, a life-changing couple of days?
I would say try your best to switch that mindset. You're not in college anymore. You don't have anybody holding your hand, anybody asking you to do anything, and they'll learn real quick. They are not going to be babysitted. There are thousands of people who want the opportunity that a lot of these guys are going to get. And when you get drafted, a lot of people say, hey, we made it. We made it. We made it. You have to switch your mindset. Okay, now let's get the work started. This is where it begins. And that's just the first step. And that's something, if I could go back, I wish I would have been able to tell myself, because I was one of those guys, like I did everything and I finally made it. And it made it a lot harder for myself to be more successful in the NFL. I wasn't one of those, top tier athletes or just gifted. I always had to work hard, and I got a little comfortable. And then once you get comfortable and you're around that much talent, it is hard to stay afloat, So if I could go back and change things, that's exactly what I would do. I would take care of like the nutrition. I would take care of everything. Like, take advice from people who have been there, see the people who aren't doing it right, and say, okay, that's not what I want to do. And because I think this opportunity is special for all of these guys. They all deserve it. And I really just hope they all make the best out of it. And if anything, now that we got more money coming to the picture, we should learn a lesson. It used to be from NFL, now from college. We can take one from old Nico. I never pronounce his last name.
Yamaliyama.
I like that. Surround yourself with people who have your best interest at heart, not theirs. And I think that'll also help you go a very long way. But it's fun. I can't wait to see where these guys land, and I'll be keeping up with them.
Thanks so much, DJ. Really appreciate his insight as always. And we have so much more from those guys. Like I said before, over on our website, we've sat down with Isaac, we sat down with Andrew, and we sat down with Landon. And you can see all those interviews over on our website right now. But before we let you go, really quickly, rapid fire. Out of those 5 guys, who do you see having the longest career in the NFL, the best career in the NFL, and why? Jacob, really quickly first.
Really quickly, I'm going to stay safe, and I'm going to go Landon Jackson for all of the reasons we talked about. It's a position in need in the NFL. He's a guy that has second, third round, fourth round pedigree already. I would pick him. If you make me pick somebody that's going to have the longest career in the NFL, because I think he has what it takes.
Absolutely. All right, Mike.
Andrew Armstrong.
Yep.
I mean, again, they can say he's a sleeper all they want. I just think he's the real deal. I think he works hard. I mean, if he had a bad attitude, or if he, thought he was better than he was, or some issue like that, then there might be a problem. He will overcome whatever this thing is that they say he doesn't have, whether he doesn't have true speed or what. I think he's faster than they realize. He can catch the ball and he can make plays, and he's a hard worker, and he's got a great attitude. Coaches love guys like that. He'll get a second contract.
I love it. Evan.
Yeah, fit is the most important part. What guy is going to be in the best fit? I think it's going to be Andrew Armstrong as well. So I'll double up with Mike and go Armstrong. I just think he's going to be in a better system than maybe Tesla or some of the other guys who end up going in the 5th, 6th, 7th round.
Kansas City.
Kansas City. There you go. I'm going to go with Jacob. So we got two for Andrew Armstrong and 2 for Landon Jackson, because like you said, it's a position of need, and also he can do a lot of things. We have seen that, what he's done at Arkansas, and so I think there's going to be a good career there for him in the NFL wherever he goes. So we'll find out. The NFL draft starts on Thursday night, and it'll go until Saturday. We will have all your coverage of who gets drafted, where they end up, and so much more over on our website. So go check that out as we go through the NFL draft. That's going to do it for Jacob, Evan, Mike, and Courtney. We appreciate you for watching. We'll see you next time.